Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast. It is day 32, and we are continuing our devoted series, reading the entire Bible this year. I am so glad to be joined again by my wife, Victoria, my friends, Shameeka and Dylan. So excited to be here again. We are continuing to journey through Exodus. Again, almost at the finish line here. Yeah. But, we don't want to rush through this. We want to make sure we get all that God has for us. So let's jump in. We are doing chapters 33, 34, 35, and 36 of Exodus today. And last we left off, Moses and the Lord are not very happy with the people of Israel because while he was away, they created a false idol. So, pick up here in 33. And after that, the Lord comes up with a plan for how he'll actually deal with these people. We get to 33. Any thoughts kind of here with the tent, what becomes known as kind of the tent of meeting that starts this first part of 33?
I love in verse 5 where the Lord says to Moses, tell them you're stiff-necked people. And if I'm to go with you guys for a single moment, I will consume you. I will blot you guys out.
Yeah.
And so he tells them to take off their ornaments and their jewelry and stuff until he knows what to do with them. And so I think it's interesting that they took off their jewelry from then on, as maybe a remove of the temptation, But then I love that he tells them I'm not going with you, but then jumping over to verses 12 through 23, it's this Moses' plea for the people, no, they're if you're not gonna go with us, I'm not going. If your presence will not go with me, this is verse 15, do not bring us up from here. Mm-hmm. And I love it that Moses has gotten to this point where no, I don't want just the promised land, right? Yeah. I don't want just that. If you aren't going to be with us, then I don't want to go. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good heart posture. Mm-hmm. For me, it's just Lord, if you're not going to be there, I shouldn't want to be there.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, it's good.
I think that's real because, leading up to this moment, we do see, God sending the angels before them and, him showing his presence and stuff. And so it was a really big deal for him to say, y'all go to the promised land, but I'm not coming with you. Mm-hmm. And, even we probably didn't mention this, but yesterday, leading off from the text, as a result of their sin, God sent a plague on them, just like how he said he would do. Yeah. For them not obeying his commandments. And so I do think they should be at a place now where it's all right, let's get serious. And that's probably where part of their obedience came from with taking off the ornaments is all right, we done got to experience God's wrath on us. And it wasn't pretty. But I did think it was interesting that Moses said, how will anyone else be able to distinguish us, your chosen people, from anybody else on the face of the earth? And I just thought it was interesting him saying that if the Lord didn't go with them. And I thought it was interesting because I'm well, what was supposed to set you guys apart wasn't just the Lord's presence being there, but you guys obeying his commandments. That's what made you holy. That's what made you, set apart, is that you wasn't indulging in different things or conforming to the patterns of the world. Mm-hmm. Literally, you were a set apart people because of your behavior, because of your reverence to the Lord, because of how you conducted yourself. And so, yeah, part of me just felt like, although it is honorable and of course you want the Lord's presence with you, that like, I'm like, they still kind of missed, it seemed like they were still missing the point of the reason why God wanted them to do those certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's like, I was gonna say, I even read the removal of jewelry slightly different in that, like, I thought it was more of a symbol of, you know, we talked about kind of God's majesty earlier this week, right? And like the people of Israel are considered the children of God, and like their jewelry was also just a symbol of their royalty as God's children, right? And like, if you think about, I mean, that was often the case in kings and kingdoms, that like their children were also dressed in royalty. They would have rings that would signify who they belonged to and things of that nature, that like you could identify, you know, who their father was simply based off of like the jewelry and the things that they wore. And I think that like God is like, no, like take that off. Like you don't reflect me anymore.
Yeah.
Like these things that I gave to you to adorn yourself with and to dress yourself with were symbols of the fact that you belong to the king.
Yeah, that's good.
But like, you don't deserve that right now, and you don't get to wear that. And so like, I looked at it as almost a stripping them of their heir to the king, right? And they're being the children. And so that's why he was just like, just take them off until I figure out what I know I'm going to do with you. Because as of right now, like you guys haven't earned that and deserve that.
Yeah, I also see the fathership of that too. It's like you get your consequence of being disobedient. This is like your punishment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is your groundedness, right?
Yeah.
You're grounded.
No, for real.
You taking all your phone, we taking your phone away, we taking your TV.
And we know that I think part of them too, like those possessions meant a lot to them. You know, even for God to even say those who are willing, like to give these things up, you know, for a lot of them it didn't
Now
mean
it's
a lot.
like, nah, whether you're willing or not, take them off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love how they dropped this tentative meeting kind of in between, because I feel like they could have had this conversation consecutively, like here with God. But I love that he designated, like he has a place that he goes to meet with the Lord here, to have some of these conversations, right? And so I think it's really interesting that it was outside of the camp. That although the Lord wants to dwell with them, he can't right now. Like this tent has to be outside of the camp at the time. And I do love that he said these people need representation. And so when they see this pillar of cloud, like now they're bowing and worshiping, right? Yeah. But my very favorite part here was when Joshua, the son of Nun, he wouldn't depart from the tent, that he would stay in the tent. I'm like, that's my boy Joshua. Like, he's still always in the presence of the Lord.
That's
here.
right.
And so while Moses was going in and out, I really wonder, like, the richness of what Joshua experienced still in the tent, the presence of the Lord there.
For sure.
It was his choice to do that too, right? Like, he could have just stayed back like everybody else or whatever. Like, he desired that. And God, I know God sees it.
Good.
Yeah. But I know, was that yesterday you were mentioning, like, you kind of went ahead and you mentioned about Moses destroying the tablets or whatever. Well, we do get to see that he creates more tablets. And still, you know, inscribes these different things, because ultimately, like, he does want his plan to be fulfilled. And I thought that was a grace in a sense of like, oh wow, like you actually doing this again twice. Yeah.
It also shows, it gives me opportunity to know that like I can have an emotional moment. Like God, in that moment, he was upset, he was furious, and he forgave, or he just gave more grace. And I think I said this in one of our services, our worship service. I don't even know what I'm saying. But point is, like, I have denied plenty of times my feelings in certain situations, just because I know God is good and everything that he does is good. But I deny the fact that I'm hurt or whatever the case may be. And I think like him making more tablets shows like one, he's he's gonna feel God has feelings, and he made me in his image, right? And just being able to like not stay in those emotions, but just step into them for a moment, you know?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah. Anything else here? Kind of. I mean, we also get to see his glory. Mm-hmm. We kind of refer to that, kind of his presence. Victoria made an apt point there. Very interesting kind of way that he gives Moses an opportunity to experience his presence without necessarily seeing his face. And some of that's there. And then, you guys refer to in 34, we kind of get to these second versions of those tablets that kind of come there. I think it's interesting. God is like, he again approaches it differently. He's like, nobody can even come close to the mountain this time. Like nobody even needs to be, no one gets to go with you. But yeah, we go from there into, again, just kind of this covenant obligation. So this is something it's repeated often in scripture, but God makes it clear that, in this land that I'm getting ready to take you, like you ought not to come into any type of treaty or agreement with the people that that inhabited, I should say. And yeah, anything that just kind of just jumped out to you guys with that, plus some of the other requirements that he's asking of the people in the covenant that they make with him.
Yeah, I do love him. Again, he has to reiterate this, but like him saying like whenever they come across these people and they find like these idols or these stones or whatever, like he told them to break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and cut down their Asherah poles. And he has to say again, do not worship any other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. And so I do love like seeing that God is like, again, like this is stuff that is hurtful to me. Like I don't want you to serve any other gods, but to go the extent of like just tear it up like if you come across it, because he knows the tendency of his people. But yeah, that stuck out to me.
Yeah, I love how he went from wanting to leave them and kill them to making a covenant with them.
Yeah.
And I love how this comes after, and I'm sorry to back up just a little bit, but just to that point, like I love that like Moses was like, in this last chapter 33, was like, okay, well, if I find favor with you, show me your way so that I might know you, like know who you are. And when God comes, the way he shows up and what he says when he shows up is he's describing like, I am merciful, I am gracious, I am slow to anger, I'm abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. And then you see him do that right afterwards by making a covenant with these people who he knows is going to turn on him again. Yeah. And so I think this is where it kind of grieves me that in the Old Testament it kind of gives like God a bad rap of like when he does blot out, certain people or certain nations or certain things, is like, oh, God's this wrathful God. But it's like really when he shows up and speaks to Moses in person, like he's really like, no, I'm loving and I'm faithful and like this is who I am. And then he turns around and shows them exactly what that looks like, because he doesn't have to make this covenant. But I do love, like you said, Shameeka, the first thing that he does say when he comes on the scene to make this new covenant with them is like devotion to me, like no other gods. Like, can we get that across the point? Like, when you come across these nations I'm gonna bring you to, destroy all their gods because it's about me.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah.
Anything else here in 34?
We also see Moses with the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights again.
Yeah.
It says that in verse 28. And this time it says without eating or drinking water. The first time I was assuming that the Lord was just providing him food. Like I didn't even think he was up there fasting. But now we see that he is fasting.
That's good.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, at the end of 34, we kind of get Moses coming from the mountain, and his face is like really is radiant and is shining. It's been kind of in God's presence, and so there's kind of this way that they have to kind of approach him with a veil and some other things. Anything there that you guys felt was significant before we kind of get into 35?
The veil. I think that was definitely a representation. We get to see, like, when Jesus comes, the veil being torn. But I think it was just something about that veil and that imagery that did stuck out to me. But also that, Moses did go the extent of, like, because his face was so radiant, that he was going to cover it.
Yeah.
Maybe it was still kind of showing, like, I don't know. I was about to say maybe it was still showing, like, because that is a part of the Lord, in a sense, on him, like, he was radiant because of God's presence. Like, if there still was this, like, a little bit of a separation, if you will, between God and the Israelites.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, I mean, we see a few different, we're fast forwarding a lot for those that may not have read the Bible before, but, like, there is a lot of parallel with Jesus, right? You kind of mentioned the veil, which, again, there's another one that's in the temple and some other things that come from that. You talk about the 40 days of fasting, right? Which is another thing that Jesus himself does and whatnot. And so it is really interesting to see a lot of those, again, that imagery and that symbolism and things that Jesus would ultimately do when he kind of came in. And I think it is significant. Like, there's a part of me that just, like, wonders if it's just me being kind of silly in my imagination here, but if, like, Jesus did some of this stuff as kind of like I was there, like I'm a fast 40 days. Like, oh, who's that remind you of?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's me. I was there. I was there. I seen that.
That's funny.
And so, but yeah, it's interesting to see a lot of those parallels happen here. Again, generations before. This is generations and generations before what would eventually take place. But that's good. So, we finally hear for the first time this command we haven't heard ever before in the beginning of chapter 35, where God says that for 6 days you should work, but on the seventh, you are to have a holy day, a Sabbath of complete rest.
Yeah, for the first time ever.
We haven't heard this. I mean, just this week alone, I don't know how many times we've heard to take a Sabbath, but we're
Sabbath.
Yeah.
Sabbath.
Like, go ahead.
Yeah, we skipped the one that was in
Sabbath.
Yeah.
we skipped the one that was in 34:21, where it also told us the same thing. But so
Plot twist, though.
right.
And my verse after that says, whoever does any work on it is to be put to death.
Yeah.
So now it's like, again, if we done heard this 11 times, now God like, all right, whoever work on the seventh day, you gonna die.
Yeah. Which, for context, like, or just to add to that, it is, I can now understand, now that I've read this as much as I have, as quickly as I've had, and we've seen this so much, I can now understand why the Pharisees and Sadducees put so much emphasis on the Sabbath.
Yes.
Like, they had created so many oral laws and traditions around the Sabbath specifically, right? Like, that was part of where Jesus and them had friction, right? He was healing on the Sabbath. They were eating on the Sabbath. They were doing all sorts of stuff. And, like, I get now why they held it in such esteem.
That's real.
To cause, because, like, as I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, man, if there's nothing else I've gotten from these laws so far, it's no other God and Sabbath. Like, if there's something I'm hearing over and over again, it's no other God and Sabbath. He ain't even told me not to kill a second time yet. And I'm just playing. But, like, it's just, there's some of these things in here that, like, it didn't really come back around so often and so consistently, except no other God and Sabbath. And so, like, I can see that. I can understand now why it became such a subset of their religion, was how to also observe the Sabbath specifically. And I think for me, it gives me some context and some appreciation for where that went.
Yeah, I love that he added this, like, don't kindle a fire, like, in your dwelling places on the Sabbath, which means, like, okay, when the sun goes down, y'all go down. Like, like, there is no lighting of your torches and lighting of your candles, and y'all not staying
it's
up.
time for bed.
Like, it wasn't like, oh, okay, we gonna rest, but we gonna turn on the lights and, chill until, like, he's like, no, when I mean rest, like, you also need to go to sleep.
And I also thought that, like, that the lamp being, because I don't know if that's in don't know if that's in Proverbs or if that's even in scripture, but I always looked at the lamps being lit at signifying like you were doing work, like you were doing something, like. But yeah, he's getting even more specific.
I'm getting sleepy on this Sabbath.
Good.
Hallelujah.
Okay. All right. So we finally get here 35, kind of starting at verse 4, where all that we've just read as far as instructions that God gave Moses, he now passes it to the Israelites, right?
Yeah.
So now he tells them what God has told them as far as how to build the tabernacle and what it is that they ought to do. So, anything that was interesting to you guys, kind of the rest of 35 here, as we get into, again, now making the call, kind of inviting people to participate in some of what took place there. Anything from 35?
He said everything that the Lord said. He remembered everything. That to me is amazing, and that's goes back to the beginning of Exodus, where he was just protesting against God, like, no, I don't think I'm the right person for this job. I don't think I'll be able to do what you called me to do. But for him, years later, be able to give everything out in full detail, again, just shows that, yes, you were the right person for this job.
Yeah. I think it is cool to see them to be able to put into practice, like let their word be their word, and like, hey, all right, like now it's your time to really show. And so again, we do hear the terminology of like whoever was willing and whose heart was moved, then they participated in bringing these offerings and all this stuff. And you even hear like a lot of them presented their gold as a wave offering to the Lord. And I don't know if that was their guilt of like, all right, Lord, I'm giving this to you, but you see that. But I also do love that, like, because I know, Victoria, in the previous days you kind of mentioned like these men having these giftings and using it, but the Lord in verse 25 like talks about the women. He said every skilled woman spun with her hands and brought what she had spun. And so it's really cool to see that it says men and women alike, like they're bringing their gifts, they're bringing the things that ultimately are going to be used to create this tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant and all these different things, but only those who were willing.
It's good.
I was like, oh, wait a minute, I misspoke. The woman is in here. They're over here spinning yarn and goat's hair and all types of stuff.
I just love that they refers, verse 29 in my version, it refers to it as a free will offering to the Lord. And it goes back to kind of what we talked about earlier this week, but just this was an invitation of free will. Like, I've given you the opportunity. It's up to you. I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to make you love me. I'm not going to make you offer anything to me. I've also equipped you with what you need, right? I gave you what you have to give back to me. But ultimately it's about free will. And I think there's something beautiful in that even if I think about the way we teach and reflect and think about giving in the modern church today, that like there's something more powerful about a free will gift offering, rather than one of, that's mandatory, right? Or out of guilt or shame. And again, we don't hear that. We don't hear Moses trying to shame them into giving, right? We don't hear Moses saying like, after all the Lord has done for you, after he done brought you out of Egypt and he done gave you this and he done this and that, like you ought to. Like it's just you ought to. My voice has been kind of, I got my preacher voice right now. With
That's so funny.
My organ
with the cough. But but it's not that. It's just whomsoever will, right? That desires, whose heart is moved. And I don't know. I just love the beauty of that, and that's true love. True love is of free will. True love is not mandatory. True love is not required. And I think that's what we see he's asking for from his people. So as we go into 36, kind of into 35 into 36, Moses then appoints those individuals that God called out by name in his conversation with them, and shares that with the people as well, and kind of gives them instruction. Anything that just you guys thought was interesting in that specifically? Kind of going into 36 here.
Yeah, I love that people just brought more than enough.
Yeah.
Like, you can see that God had given them more than enough.
Mm-hmm.
And like, what he was even asking of them wasn't too much.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. To the point they had to cut it off. They had to go stop receiving any of the offerings because they had more than what they needed. That is good.
I love the fact that they're showing like this humbleness, to just be obedient. Like, I just think about being in trouble. Like, you just gonna do everything right in the Lord's eyes for a period of time to make sure that I'm in good graces. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I just see that, like, that humbleness of them. Like, okay, we messed up big time. Let's contribute.
Yeah. I will go back to, like, one of the things you guys said that I thought was interesting was obviously, that they brought so much that, they had more than enough. And I don't know, I think I personally just kind of reflected on, like, God, would I ever get to a point where I was so generous that you told me to stop?
Ooh.
Like,
God told my.
you know what I mean? Like, I
Water bottle
don't, like,
from
could I ever get to that point where it's just like, where you just hear the voice of God just say, like, no, enough's enough. Like, you've done enough. You've given enough. Like, I feel like it's unlikely, but like, that's where I would want to get to. Like, I want to get to that level of generosity where it's not like God is begging me to give.
Preaching.
You hear them keys?
That boy is preaching.
But I mean, it's true though. Like, I don't want to get to the point where God is begging me to give. Like, I'd much rather be in the place where he is begging me to stop. Like, and he's saying, like, no, that's enough. Like, you've done enough. And so I think that's what I kind of took away is, like, it's an overwhelming expression. I love to see that. But, like, again, for my own life, can I get to that place where God's just like, enough's enough. You've done enough in that case.
Yeah. And I was going to say too, like, I know we like to talk about Acts a lot where we get to see the people just use of their gifts and their time and all that stuff. But, like, I feel like this was also a representation of, like, why it's okay to Sabbath, because it's like when you really put all your resources together, you really do realize that not only do you have what you need, oftentimes you do have more than enough. And so I think that is encouraging in that way to see that, like, no, like, not only is God going to provide, but he's capable of even providing in abundance in places where we would think that there's lack or less than.
Yeah. Good. Well, we kind of wrap up 36 with Bezalel just really following instructions.
Come on.
It seems basic and simple, and maybe not extremely profound, but I mean, I think we can just pause and say he obeyed. He just followed the instructions that God gave him.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that Moses took the time to detail every instruction that he followed exactly as it was written.
Yep.
Right? Like, he didn't just summarize and say, and then he built the tabernacle.
Yeah.
He was like, no, I want you to read word for word that everything God said in that previous conversation I had with him, he did it.
Yeah.
Right? He built it as instructed in each piece, from the measurements to the fabrics to the loops to the whatever. Like, he did it exactly as he was instructed. And, we've had this conversation before since we've been in this podcast series, but it is a lesson in just, like, obedience being complete obedience, right? That partial obedience is disobedience, right? And so it is like just this lesson and instruction on do it exactly as God said.
Yeah.
And we see him kind of do that here for the rest of 36. But anything else that jumped out to you guys before we kind of wrap up today's conversation?
I'm good over here.
All right. Hearts and minds are clear. I haven't said that in a few days. But, just to really appreciate you guys joining us again. We have one more day of reading in Exodus to wrap up this week. And then we will be through 2 books by the time we finish. After tomorrow, we will have done both Genesis and Exodus. And so just want to commend you for that. But see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch.